Hi, teachers. My name is Erin Austin, and this is how to open, fill, and grow a successful online curriculum store. This is a presentation that I've done at various conferences around the country, and I wanted to record it and put it up on my YouTube channel so that it is available at any time to anyone, anywhere, and for free. I hope you will find some things in this presentation that will help you feel inspired and help you have success doing what you know best and making money from it. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to start with just a little bit on my background in the topic, and I want you to know that my goals are to help you make money. And you might think, well, Erin, if you're a world language teacher and you're teaching us how to make money, isn't that creating competition? Maybe, but I also really believe in world language teachers. And I think we all do something a little bit different. We all have our unique spin, and I think there's room for everybody. I also really want to increase the amount of high quality materials that are available to teachers. We all know that there are definitely things that we can buy and we get them and we're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, or this just isn't going to work for my situation, or why is this not even correct? So I really like that when we can sell our materials online, we can leave reviews and see what other teachers think of materials. I also think that really leads to equity. A lot of what is available that is teacher made online is cheaper than what you can find from big textbook companies and their ancillary materials. So once we get into the nitty gritty, I'm going to talk about opening your store, filling your store, and growing a successful store. So please, at any time, feel free to take a picture of the screen, take any notes. I will give you my contact information at the end, so you can absolutely contact me if you have questions. So here we go. A little bit of my background. So I am a national board certified French teacher, and I am currently teaching in Colorado. I just finished my 20th year of teaching, which seems just crazy to me, but I love it. I absolutely love it. I primarily teach French, but I'm dual certified at K-12 French and K-12 Art. So depending upon the year, I sometimes teach AP Art History. I really started selling actively and seriously on Teachers Pay Teachers in 2014. And I do think that there are a lot of websites out there that will enable you to sell your original resources. This presentation is not specific to any one of those. I just happen to use Teachers Pay Teachers. My approach in selling my resources online is simple. I work full-time. I have 2 small children. I have part-time jobs. I sit on 2 boards. I really don't have time to be fancy. I create simple materials and make good money from it. So I don't want anyone coming into this thinking that you have to do things that are fancy and complicated. You absolutely don't need to. I do want to point out that I am the only author with a book specific to world language on this very topic. And that book is titled The Ultimate Guide to Selling Your Original World Language Resources. That was published by Routledge in 2021. So first of all, opening your store. Why sell? I listed a few different reasons here. I think particularly in the past few years, and certainly of the millennial generation, becoming location independent is pretty huge. You can absolutely create anywhere in the world, upload your materials from anywhere in the world, and make money from it. One that was really big for me as a reason to sell was to have fun money. I had been in grad school doing 3 different graduate programs for many years, That's where all my money was going, and I just didn't have fun money. And so this was something that I could do to have money to use for things that were just extra. So, for example, I paid for a good chunk of my honeymoon to Tahiti and New Zealand with money that I made from creating resources and selling them online. I do think another reason to sell is that selling your original resources uses skill that you paid for with going to college. And that's significantly better than working retail or driving for Lyft or working in a restaurant. So I want you to think, like, what could you do with an extra $100 a month? What could you do with an extra 500, an extra 1,000 a month? Give yourself a little bit of space to dream here, because it's all possible. First of all, I want you to get over imposter syndrome. There are a lot of people when they're thinking about doing online curriculum sales who think, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do it. What do I know? You know a lot. And you are an expert in your field. You have experience, you have energy, you have creativity, you have a wealth of knowledge, that things that you have learned over the years, either from teaching or from being in school or both. You have drive. You might have more time than other people. And you might think, oh yeah, but someone else could do this thing that I'm thinking about making. And yeah, sure, they could, maybe, but they're not you. They don't know what you know. And the other piece is, yeah, okay, well, maybe they can, but are they? I also want you to think of native versus non-native speaker fears. A lot of times I hear people say, I don't think I can make resources to sell them because I'm not a native speaker. And I want to just stress that being a native speaker does not mean that your language is flawless. Consider Rachel Green. There are other people who get really concerned about, like, okay, maybe I am an expert in my field. I'm not a native speaker, but I'm okay with that. But I'm really scared about getting negative reviews. Spoiler alert right here. You're going to get them. You absolutely will. But I want to point out to people that even the Beatles had people who didn't like them. The Beatles got negative reviews. So if they can get negative reviews and be the best that ever were, I think we can handle it too. You also want to really consider, before you open your store, who are your buyers? Your buyers are not you. That's key. They might be brand new teachers. They might be teachers who are just lost. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to teach such and such concept. They might be teachers who are forced to teach a class they have no background in. I happen to be a French teacher, and I know all the time, all over the United States, it happens where Spanish teachers are told, oh, you teach Spanish, we need somebody to fill an extra French 1 class. Aren't they similar? You go teach it. Or vice versa. Now that shouldn't happen, but it does. And those teachers need help. It might be teachers teaching a class for the very first time, and they're like, oh no, like, it's been a while since I've dealt with these concepts. I'm not really sure what to do. Your buyers might be teachers who are just overwhelmed. They might have 5 different preps. They might be coaching. They might have a second job of their own. They might have children at home. They might have to be caring for a loved one. And they just, even though they can create, they don't have time. Your buyers might be teachers who are creativity challenged. They might really be able to do simple things well, but yearn for creativity. And maybe you have that. It might be teachers who lack a skill that you have. Maybe you're really good at creating videos, and your buyers are like, I don't know how to do that. I can do a lot of things, but I don't know how to create videos, and I want some, and they come to you for videos. Might be teachers who are just bored. Maybe they're like, oh man, I've been doing the same thing for years. I just want something different. Great. You can be the one to supply that to them. Might be also veteran teachers who are bored or who are like, you know what? I've been doing this for a long time. I want to mix in some new things. I want to try something different. They're really skilled, but they just want to mix it up. And it might be non-teachers. You might have people looking to buy things from your store who are not teachers and are trying to teach. For example, homeschooling parents. So when you open your store, I want you to consider uploading and selling resources from two primary areas. Number one is selling from your niche, and number two is selling everything else. So a niche might be a class that you teach. So maybe your niche is IB German, or maybe your niche is exploring Chinese. Your niche might be a specific kind of product, for example, videos or smartboard activities, or maybe you're really good at making classroom posters. It might be a skill or an area of expertise. So for example, you might be a native speaker and you can lean into that as your niche. You might have a doctorate in the language and you can lean into that as your niche. It also might be a passion or a particular creative focus that you have. So maybe it's history-based lessons. You're really into history and maybe you actually have another major in history and you are great at creating things that are more historical. Or maybe you're really good at original songs. It might also be an activity. So for example, maybe you're really great at creating original games. Might be a high need, low availability area. So for example, Arabic, or some of the heritage speakers or of Spanish. That's really common in the United States. It might be just a language like Arabic that is that's one of the lesser taught languages, so there's not a lot of curriculum out there for it. It might be a geographic area or language variant. For example, maybe you have a lot of expertise in Austrian German or Argentine Spanish. So think about what is your niche. And sometimes if you're like, I don't know what my niche is, ask your colleagues, ask your friends, ask former classmates that you were in education classes with. Ask, what do I do that stands out to you? What do I know that stands out to you? The other thing you want to sell is everything else. So everything that you know how to create well. And what I want to stress here is this includes things that you don't use. So, for example, let's say that you are a world language teacher that exclusively uses CI type of instruction and resources. Totally fine. But what's important to recognize is that that's not everybody. That is not going to be all of your buyers. Maybe that can be your niche, and then you want to think about everything else you know how to create. So let's say you do know how to create things that are more grammar-based, more vocabulary-focused, something that's that you wouldn't use in class, but you know how to create it and you know how to create it well. Please create it and upload it. Then let's get to filling your store. This is kind of my golden rule that I talk about in my book. It's a numbers game. Absolutely, yes, the resources have to be quality. That's a non-negotiable. But generally speaking, the more you upload, the more you'll make. It is nearly impossible, I think, to make a lot of money without a lot of resources. So when we talk about filling your store, I want you to understand that you absolutely have more resources to sell than you think. Very often I get people that tell me like, yeah, I think I could do this, but I don't have much that I think I could do. And I want to challenge you here in your thinking. I want you to think of how you can break down one product into multiple products and the inverse of that, how you can group multiple products into one. And remember, you might think, no one will buy this. Yes, they will. If it's written well and it's useful, it will sell. So a good example of that is I have a rubric in my store that it took me 10 minutes to make. And I thought, oh man, nobody is going to buy this. Why do I even have this in my store? And it's one of the things that has sold the most. So let's look at breaking down resources. You really want to capitalize on numbers. So for example, you might say, hey, I have a guide for a 10-chapter novel, and the novel's in the public domain, and it's in Chinese. That's just one item. Well, when I look at that, I see 23 different products. So let's look at that. I see a guide for each chapter. So that is 10 chapters. And you might think, well, who's going to buy a guide for just chapter 5? You would be surprised. Someone might just want a guide for chapter 5 because they're going to use it as a quiz. Or somebody might want a guide for chapter 5 because they were left all of the other chapters by the teacher who was at the school before them, and they just don't have chapter 5. So make a guide for each chapter. Then you want to make a bundle with all the chapters. So you're going to take all 10 chapters, put them together, and that's going to be one product. Then you want to make a quiz for each chapter. Now, you could do this in a few different ways. I just wrote here a quiz for each chapter. That's 10 items. But maybe you want to make a multiple choice quiz for each chapter. Maybe you want to make a true-false quiz for each chapter. Maybe you want to make a fill-in-the-blank or short answer quiz and have different types of quizzes for each chapter. That's completely possible. Then you want to make a final project. Then you want to make a bundle with everything. So that's 23 items when you originally thought you had one. You also want to think about the other stuff that you know how to sell. Have you had any experience making graphic organizers? These come in handy and they sell. This is just like what I was talking about with my rubric. I didn't think anybody would buy it because I was like, this is so simple and I'm making it really cheap. It's like 50 cents or something like that. Graphic organizers too. There's a lot of people who think, oh man, anybody can make this. Anybody could, but are they? And do they have the time? Maybe not. So make it, upload it, sell it. Rubrics of any kind. Think about calendars with course pacing. This is particularly helpful for teachers who are teaching, for example, an AP class for the very first time. Pacing can really help. Think about lists that you have made that could be valuable to other teachers. Outlines of topics, outlines of units. Think about ideas for different school communities. Let's say you're the head of the wellness group and you have tons of different activities for wellness that different staff or departments could do in other schools. Upload them. How-to documents. So maybe you're really great at, again, let's use that example of creating videos. You're great at that. You can make a document of how to do that. You could even make a couple different versions. How to do that on a PC, how to do that on a Mac, how to do that using different programs. Think about non-teaching documents. I know someone who is a world language teacher, but also sells a bunch of games that she created for, it was baby showers or wedding showers, that people who are not teachers are going to Teachers Pay Teachers to buy things like that. It comes up in Google searches. So when you're filling your store, there are some best practices that you should consider. Number one, try to make things editable. This makes buyers much happier, especially if there is an error. So when I was originally starting my store, I was like, well, I don't want to make it editable. Then somebody could change the whole thing. At this point, I don't even care. I'm like, if this is helpful for your classroom, change it the way you need to. So editable is key, and that also makes buyers happier because they do not have to use whiteout if there is an error. You also want to provide answer keys. This also makes buyers happier, and you want to remember your buyers aren't you. So think of that person who is fresh out of undergrad. They get a job teaching Spanish, and they are told that they have to teach AP Spanish. And they might be thinking, oh, wow, I'm not ready for this. Provide an answer key. Their language level probably isn't where yours is. What's really important is that your resources are clear above anything else. Clear is a non-negotiable. So I want you to write directions like you would for a sub, both for the teacher and for the students in the resources that you create. Then along with clear, either pair it with creative or practical. So clear and creative or clear and practical. Both are fine, but you need at least one of them. Now let's talk about customer service. Customer service is key because you have a store. You are CEO, you are head honcho of your store. And like any store, you need to provide customer service. And that includes both offense and defense. So let's look at offense first. The more you can front load customer service, the fewer problems you're going to have. And the best way to front load customer service is in your product description. So you want to include what your resource is, including what language it's in. You want to include what your product is not. You may want to defend a choice. So, for example, I'm a French teacher. I may say, in this example, I used this specific word, which is Quebecois French and not Metropolitan French, and here is why. You want to say what is on each page of the document and why this resource works well. Get excited about it. Sell it. You want to say how long this activity or resource will take, and you want to include hyperlinks. You want to give teacher directions and student directions. Again, they really need to be clear. So let's here look at an example. So this is a weak product description. You might say, this is a bingo game to practice house vocabulary. And as a world language teacher, you might think, okay, bingo game, that's clear. Why do I have to say anything more than that? House vocabulary, okay. I would think that other teachers would know what kind of vocab comes up when teaching about the house. The problem is you are going to have buyers who are not you. I can't stress that enough. So, for example, I know a teacher author who sold a bingo game and got a negative rating because whomever bought it said, I don't know how to play bingo. It turns out that that buyer was from another country and didn't know how to play. So let's look at how we could revamp. This is a bingo game to practice house vocabulary. So I'm going to give you just a minute to read this. Good. Please note at the very bottom, the word here is underlined, so that would be a hyperlink. So it's really a great practice to hyperlink to other resources that you have in your product descriptions. Maybe somebody only came wanting to buy one thing. Maybe they wanted a game for house vocabulary, but maybe they don't have any sort of introductory sheet on house vocabulary, and you say right there that you have it, and they click and they're like, oh, actually I could use that. Then you're selling another item. So let's talk a little bit about defense. Customer service, in my estimation, is about 50% preventative work. So that's offense. That's writing great product descriptions. It's writing resources that are clear and practical or clear and creative. Offense is also engaging with your customers. And it is also something that engaging with your customers really, there's a lot of different ways to do that. We'll talk more about that. But the problem area is dealing with the unhappy customers, only 2%. So let's talk about engaging with customers. You want to reply to the positive comments that people leave. So it might be just something short, like saying thank you, or in English or in your target language. You might want to say, oh, that's so awesome to hear, if they tell you that they used your product and they really liked it. Maybe say, oh, glad your students loved it. Doesn't have to be anything super long. You want to message your followers. You might want to tell them about a new product. You might want to tell them about a free product that is timely. So for example, let's say a holiday is coming up and you message your followers and say, hey, I got a free resource for the holiday that's coming up. You might want to just thank them. Say, hey, it's the end of the semester. Thank you so much for your patronage. You might want to give them hyperlinks to other products you have, maybe to your blog, link to your YouTube channel. You might want to wish them a great semester. You might want to alert them to a sale coming, or alert them to a change in your store or change in products. Engaging with your customers is also, unfortunately, dealing with negative comments. So let's talk a little bit more about that. This is not the bulk of your comments, but it is important to know how to deal with. So you might get something like this. You might get a negative comment as a Spanish teacher with a Spanish resource store, and the person says, this is in Spanish, 1 star. I'm an English teacher. And in your head, you might be thinking, yeah, well, it said it was in Spanish. The little preview clip shows it's in Spanish. My store name is in Spanish. Why did you think it was in English? But it will happen for sure. And it's also important to understand that some people are just unhappy in general, and there's nothing that we can do. So just remember that sane and happy people will see your reply and how you deal with negative comments. So here is what I would recommend as a reply. I'll give you a second to look at that. When you're looking to reply, I want you to consider the difference between what you want to say and what you should say. So often what you want to say is, buyer, you're crazy. Step back and think about a way to do that professionally. This is one that I have gotten, somebody begging to get something for free. And here is an example of how to handle that. And that should say regularly post free items in my store. So remember, the negative comments will come. There will be people who are unhappy, but there were also negative comments about the Beatles, and they were the best. And you are too. You can handle it. So let's talk some sales strategies. Creating bundles is a really great way to make your sales shoot up faster. Creating bundles is simply grouping items together. So let's use that example from a little bit ago about the Chinese teacher who wrote a guide for a novel. So you're going to sell the chapters separately, but then bundle them all together and sell them as a group. You also want to hyperlink. You want to hyperlink in your product descriptions and always when you message followers. Make sure you're sending a hyperlink to something. You want to create templates. So I'm a French teacher. I want to think about what could be used by all French teachers for a certain topic. So let's say I want to talk about geography and I want to create a template for, I don't know, different countries that are Francophone. And then also think what could be used by all language teachers. Let's say I create a great template in French that all French teachers could use when doing geography. Then maybe I want to take that exact same template, turn it into English, and sell it because maybe other language teachers might want to use that with their target language. You also want to think about curb appeal when you're filling your store. So my personal opinion, and again, this is just me as a high school teacher, is that it is not necessary to try to make your resources look cute or fancy. I want you to remember that clarity is key. Clear and creative or clear and practical is going to sell. And particularly as a high school teacher, I don't care the way a resource looks. If it is good and it's good for my students, I can use it in class. It hits exactly what I need. That's all I need. So, for example, you might see something like this sold online, and you might look at that as a product cover and you might think, oh man, that is so beautiful. I love that. And I don't know how to do that. And even if I did know how to do that, I don't think I have the time to do that. I want you to know that that's okay. Remember, not every buyer is you, but also not every seller is you. There are sellers who are creating resources and selling them in various outlets full time. For me, like I said before, I'm teaching full time. I have other side gigs. I have 2 small children. I don't have time to do things that look fancy. And I make good money creating resources that are simple, yet clear and creative or clear and practical. So when I create covers for my items, I actually use PowerPoint. I create a slide in PowerPoint. I screenshot that slide and use that. So that might be something that you would see in my store. It's not fancy, but it gets the job done. And it works well for the time that I have to give. When you're filling your store, I want you to think about equity. This is key. So think about using global names. As a French teacher, it might be really common to use names like Jean-Luc, Marie-Thérèse, Monique, but that's pretty metropolitan France. So you might want to think about using names like Farah and Khalil and put in some names that are a little bit more global in the Francophone world. You want to use global images. So think about using images from different countries for your resources if you're using images. Some people don't use images, and that's okay. When you are doing anything involving families, please show family variety. Representation matters for our students. So think about the perceived socioeconomic level in the families that you're showing. Think about ethnicity. Think about showing single parent families. Think about same-sex parent families. Show diversity in physical ability, age, and gender. So here, if at all possible, talk about or use images of people who are differently abled. Use images that have men, women, or non-binary people who are young, who are the age of your students, who are in their 20s, who are older, who are in retirement. That's important for students to see and be able to talk about in the language. Please educate yourself. There are a ton of JEDI-based professional development options out there. JEDI being justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And every time you take those, or at least for me, I think about my curriculum and my resources and how I teach differently and think about what I can do better. Check your own language. It's very common for world language teachers to say in class, well, in Spain, they say blah, blah, blah. In Spanish, they say blah, blah, blah. Why they? Let's use we. In Spanish, we say whatever it is, so that you're implying, hey, we are all Spanish speakers here. We are all German speakers here. We are all Arabic speakers here at different levels, but we are speaking those languages. Also recognize school inequality. This is a big one. So for example, technology. You might create something as a resource that you need a certain technology set up to make happen in a classroom. I want you to consider, is there a way that you could make that exact same resource for someone who had none of that technology? Is there a way that that resource could happen with pen and paper? If so, create that resource. Post it, whatever the name of the resource is, and then add tech version, post another one, non-tech version, and then hyperlink those versions to each other. So that if someone finds the tech version and they're like, oh man, I don't have all those things I would need, and then they see the hyperlink, ooh, a non-tech version, they can go right there. You also want to recognize student ability. You may want to create multiple versions of a single item to fit differently abled students. So maybe you have, let's go back to that house vocabulary topic. Maybe you have an activity or a simple handout on house vocabulary, and you're like, this is what I would give my students. But what about if I had a student who, for example, was on the autism spectrum, or a student who has vision problems, or a student who has a lot of problems with attention? How could I rearrange this? How could I make it different for that student? And maybe that's not something that you have the ability to do, but if you do, I bet somebody would buy it. So lastly, when we talk about filling your store, let's get back to that golden rule. It is a numbers game. Upload, upload, upload. So we're ending with growing a successful store. Remember, every store is different. Every seller is different. Don't compare. You do not know what is going on in other sellers' lives. Like I said, you might be doing this on the side. You might have a couple hours a week to donate to this. Conversely, there might be someone who is doing this full time. So there are two types of goals that you should have. You should have SMART goals and milestone goals. SMART goals are controllable. They are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So, for example, I'm going to upload 3 products a week every week for 6 months. That is absolutely controllable. You can control how many products you upload per week or per month. Another one, I'll revamp the product descriptions for every product in my store by the end of next month. So you're giving yourself a specific task. It's measurable. There are 50 of them. You're giving yourself a deadline that this is going to happen by the end of next month. And it's relevant. because maybe you've got 50 things in your store now, but after listening to some of the ideas here, you're like, ooh, there are maybe some things I should change. This would be a great SMART goal going forward. But conversely, it's important to have milestone goals too. Milestone goals you have very little control over. Milestone goals are something you reach during the process. And I didn't mention this step about goals at the beginning because I think it's often best to just get started. I know that I could take months just thinking of goals. I love that. But it's better to just dive in, I think. So for example, I want to make $1,000 with my store. That is not something that you have specific control over. You can do things that help that, but not specifically get you to that $1,000. Or I will take a trip to Kenya and go on safari with the money I earn from my store. That's an awesome goal, but you don't have complete control over that. SMART goals, complete control. Milestone goals, little control. Paying off your student loan, that's a big one and a great one to have. You also want to think about leveling up. Once you really get going with your store, you might be in a really good groove. You might be doing a lot of the things that we talked about, and you might be thinking, okay, well, what's next? A lot of things. You might want to create product lines. So let's say you're really good at creating a certain type of activity, and it's applicable to a lot of different vocabulary sets. Awesome. Create a product line. And then message your followers and say, hey, I've created a product line of this activity for all of these grammar or vocabulary topics. Create templates. Again, it might be a template that can be used for multiple topics in your specific target language, or it might be something that you create in English because it could be used for a lot of different target languages. Create bundles. Look at everything that you have, see what you can lump together. Also, you might look at things that you have created as a bundle and see how you can pick them apart. You may want to seek out followers. Some people are really into this. I happen to not be. I just simply have not cared how many followers I have, or don't have for that matter. But there are people who seek out followers and are constantly trying to get people to follow their stores. That might be a strategy for you. You may want to start a blog, start a YouTube channel, start a podcast, start a Twitter handle specifically for your store, maybe a TikTok specifically for your store or your tips, anything like that, something that can go hand in hand with what you do. Or you might think, oh God, that all sounds awful. You don't have to do it. It's just ideas. You may want to teach a class. So maybe there is something that you know how to do really, really well. And there is a way in your district for you to teach that. Maybe it's something that is district sponsored. Maybe it is something that is community ed, where you go and teach teachers something, and then you have a little blurb at the end and say, by the way, I create the thing that I just taught you to create, and I sell it, and here is my store. And you might want to pass out business cards to the students in those classes. Business cards, great place to go is Groupon. Man, you can get some really great ones with a lot of creative control over them on Vistaprint, and there's usually a Groupon for it. You may want to present at conferences on, I'm not saying necessarily on your store, but something that you do well. Maybe you're presenting at conferences on something in your niche, and then you can say to the participants at the conference, by the way, all these things I just taught you about, I sell on my online store, and here's my business card. On social media, join groups or start a group or follow hashtags that are related to what you're doing. Maybe related to world language, maybe relating to selling, maybe related to specific things. Again, maybe your niche. Maybe you want to be the one to start a group. Maybe you want to create a social media page just for your store. There are certainly people who do that and do well at it. I also want you to think of legal considerations. This is a big one. This could be a whole multi-hour presentation, not by me, but by an intellectual property lawyer. But I want to say this as an overarching piece that's important to know. If you made a resource on school time with school resources for use at school, it is the intellectual property of your district. It is not your intellectual property, and you cannot sell it. That is important. Now, to many teachers, including myself, we think, well, that doesn't make any sense. I made it. It's mine. It came from my head. Yes, but this is actually a really common thing in the non-education, more of the business world. So you have to be careful about when you are creating and how. So you may want to consider consulting with a lawyer. This is not something necessarily that you need to do right away. It's something that I did after a couple years, and I'm glad I did. I don't consult with my lawyer regularly, but that first consultation was a big one. Look for free resources. So for example, most cities have a small business association, and within that small business association, there are a lot of people there who have a lot of experience in intellectual property who can help. You want to look for tax write-offs. This is important. So if you are going all in on creating resources, and let's say you buy a new computer that you're using to create these resources, part of that can be deducted on taxes. So isn't there more? Well, yes, there's a lot more. This is a really huge topic. So I want you to think of terms of use pages. A lot of sellers do terms of use pages right from the get-go, right from day one. I did not. And the reason is, I think anything that's like getting into the legal realm a little bit can be really intimidating. For the most part, no one's going to come and sue you. You might have someone say, hey, you need to take that down, and then you do it. But terms of use pages, I think often sellers can get really lost in them, and it just backs up their start time for actually selling their store. So I recommend doing terms of use pages a little ways in. Once you have a few things uploaded and you're getting in the hang of it and you've got a flow going, then add them in. But this, to me, is something that can hinder people from getting started. Conversely, there are a lot of people who will tell you, absolutely, you have to have them from day one. So you do you. You want to look at the paid or free versions of the platform that you're considering using. I use Teachers Pay Teachers. There is a free version and a paid version. The primary difference is that the paid version gets you a higher percentage of the commission. You want to think about what you're doing with your store name. This is a big one and a fun one. Maybe a store logo. But then again, you might just want to use PowerPoint or Google Slides and create a slide and screenshot it, and that's your logo, and that's absolutely fine. You want to consider free items. A lot of sellers have a ton of free items, and then there are others who don't have any. Consider what is going to be best for you. Creating categories in your store. My recommendation here is to go look at other sellers, see what they have, see what makes sense to you and what doesn't. Think about how you price your resources. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I recommend, in short, starting pretty cheap, and then once you get some sales and some good comments and good ratings, then slowly raise prices. You want to think about tracking your data. This is huge. A lot of the platforms that you use will track data for you. You might have something else that you use to track specific data that the platform doesn't. You might want to think about throwing sales. Some platforms have sales that they do regularly and you can get in on that. Otherwise, you can throw sales that are completely separate from the platform. Consider those product lines again. Think about what you know how to do well, whether or not you would ever use it in your class. Think about what your niche is. Create some product lines around that. Think about taxes. Talk to someone and think, ask them questions like, how do I do taxes if I have an online curriculum store? What does that mean? Again, think about those free options like the Small Business Association. You don't have to go right to a lawyer. Or think about asking a seller friend that you may have. Take an in-depth look at the areas that we covered in this presentation and go back and think, okay, where am I a little lacking? Where can I add more? Look at some how-tos for some of the more complex topics. So you got a store, it's running well, and you're like, okay, what's my next step? I really like writing. Maybe I should make a blog, but I don't know how to do that. Look at some how-tos. Watch some videos. Go to something like Skillshare.com and watch a class on how to do that. And when you're looking at all these options, it is really key. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't compare, just start. There are so many options. What's key is starting. All of these other things that you're looking at on this particular screen, that can come later. It's okay. There's absolutely no rush. The thing I want to really talk about the most is getting a partner. This has been one of the absolute best things that I have done. I am a French teacher and I have a good friend who is a curriculum resource seller as well, and she is a Spanish teacher. We kind of went into this journey together. And what we have done over the years is we have helped each other. When one or the other of us has gotten a negative review and we don't know how to deal with it, we'll consult with each other. Or we actually have the same intellectual property lawyer, or did for a while when we were living in the same state, and we consulted with each other on what we learned. We also, and this was the best thing for our stores, she and I would each create new things, new games, for example, and send them to each other. I would say, hey, here's this new game I created. Here, I translated it for you, and here's how it works. And she would take it and translate the whole thing into Spanish and sell it in her store. Then she would do the same for me. She would create things in Spanish, send them to me either in Spanish or in English and say, hey, here's how it works. I'm giving you written permission to use this. And then I would take them, Frenchify them, and sell them in my store. So that has been really, really helpful to both of us. And I would highly recommend considering that. So now let's look at some other resources for you. On Facebook, there are a lot of Facebook groups that you can join that can help you. It's really, most of these are just great communities of people trying to help others. It's trying to help others be successful, trying to grow that field of resources that we all have access to. There is an online course called TPT Focus Success. I don't know who runs it, but I know a lot of sellers have gone here. I also don't know how much it is, but consider anything that you spend money on can be a tax write-off. So things like books or things like courses that you take or technology that you use. And lastly, there's my book, which is available on Amazon and on my publisher's website. My publisher often has sales, so you can often get it cheaper than you can on Amazon. So lots of resources out there to help you. And that final resource is me. So again, I'm Erin Austin. Please feel free to contact me with questions and or connect after this little online video. You can follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn, email me questions at any point. I'm really happy to help. I don't charge for that. Just email, let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much. I hope what I had to share is helpful.